The Galactic Council chambers stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian and living crystal. Thousands of representatives from hundreds of species filled the curved rows of seats, their voices creating a constant hum of a dozen languages translated in real time by invisible systems. Light poured down from artificial suns embedded in the ceiling, each one calibrated to provide comfort for different species with different needs. Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat in the very last row, in the very last seat, pressed against the cold wall of the gallery. This was humanity's assigned position in the council. Not by accident, not by oversight, by design. She had occupied this seat for 32 years. Before her, others had sat here for nearly 2 centuries. The seat was uncomfortable, the view was poor, and the translation systems often glitched when it came to human languages. Nobody had ever bothered to fix them. Today, like so many days before, humanity's petition sat at the bottom of the agenda. Elena had submitted it 6 months ago, requesting that Earth be elevated from observer status to minor member status. This would give humanity the right to vote on resolutions that affected their own territory. A simple thing. A reasonable thing. The session had been going on for 9 hours. They had discussed trade routes between the Crystalline Accord and the merchant guilds of Nexus Prime. They had debated the proper taxation of helium-3 mining in the outer systems. They had spent 2 hours arguing about the correct color for the new diplomatic uniforms. Now, finally, the automated system announced the final item. Petition 447C. Species designation human. Request for elevation to minor member status. Submitted by Ambassador Elena Vasquez of Earth. Elena stood. She had prepared her speech carefully. She had practiced it in front of mirrors, in front of her staff, in front of her own reflection in the polished walls of Earth's modest embassy. She opened her mouth to speak. Motion to table, said High Counselor Vrathkor of the Vorthani hegemony. He did not look up from his data tablet. His scales, deep green and edged with gold, caught the light as he scratched at something on the screen. We have more pressing matters to discuss at future sessions. Seconded, said the representative of the Crystalline Accord. The silicon-based being did not even produce the word itself. Its translation device spoke while the creature continued calculating something on its personal terminal. All in favor of tabling petition 447C? The vote took 3 seconds. The motion passed with an overwhelming majority. Several species did not bother to vote at all. A few had already left their seats, anticipating the session's end. Petition 447C is tabled. This session is concluded. Elena remained standing for a moment. Around her, representatives began to file out, chattering about dinner plans and upcoming negotiations. A few glanced in her direction. Most did not. A young Torvathi diplomat, his blue furs still bright with youth, paused near her seat. "Bad luck," he said, not unkindly. "Perhaps next session." Elena smiled politely. "Perhaps." She sat back down and waited until the chamber was nearly empty. Then she pulled out a small notebook actual paper, a human affectation that other species found amusing, and began to write. She noted which species had voted to table the petition. She noted which had abstained. She noted which had not attended at all. She noted the exact phrasing of Vrathkor's dismissal, the casual contempt in his voice, the way he had not even bothered to look at her while ending humanity's hopes for another year. She had been making these notes for 32 years. The notebooks filled 3 shelves in her private office. When the chamber was truly empty, Elena walked slowly down the long steps to the central dais. She stood where the High Counselor sat, looking up at the seat she had occupied for 3 decades. It was so far away, so small. She turned and walked out through the main doors, the ones reserved for full council members. A security officer stopped her. Observer representatives used the side entrance, he said. He was Vorthani, young and proud, his scales polished to a shine. Of course, Elena said. My apologies. After 32 years, I sometimes forget. She walked back across the chamber, through the side door, down the narrow corridor that led to the lesser embassies. The walls here were not polished obsidian. They were simple metal, functional, and cold. Earth's embassy was the smallest on the station. It occupied 3 rooms on the lowest level, wedged between a storage facility and a recycling processor. The constant hum of machinery made sleep difficult for the junior staff. They had complained about it when Elena first arrived. They had stopped complaining years ago. Her aide, Marcus Chen, met her at the door. He was young, ambitious, and patient. Elena had chosen him specifically for that patience. The petition? He asked. Tabled. Marcus nodded. He had expected nothing else. That makes 47 consecutive sessions. 47, Elena agreed. She walked to her office and sat behind her desk. The desk was made of wood from Earth, oak that had grown in a forest that no longer existed. She touched its surface gently. The Vorthani didn't even let you speak this time, Marcus said. No, they're getting more dismissive, not less. Yes. Marcus stood in the doorway, waiting. He had learned to wait. It was the first thing Elena had taught him. Elena opened a drawer and pulled out a communication device. It was not standard council technology. It was human-made, built in facilities that did not appear on any official registry, using principles that human scientists had developed in secret, laboratories on moons that the council had never bothered to survey. She typed a short message. Continue protocol, patience. Timeline unchanged. She sent it. The device encrypted the message using methods that would take council computers 300 years to crack, then transmitted it through a network of hidden relays scattered across the galaxy. The relays had been placed over 2 centuries, one, by human ships that traveled slowly and drew no attention. Within an hour, the message would reach 14 different facilities. Research stations hidden in asteroid fields. Manufacturing plants buried beneath the ice of frozen moons. Training academies built into the shells of hollowed-out comets. Observation posts orbiting dead stars. None of these facilities appeared on any council record. None of them had ever been detected. Marcus watched her put the device away. How much longer? He asked. Elena looked at him. She saw the frustration in his eyes, the anger he kept carefully controlled. She had felt the same anger once long ago. She had learned to transform it into something more useful. The Vorthani have been the dominant military power in this galaxy for 6,000 years, she said. The crystal in the cord has controlled galactic commerce for 4,000. They have built their power on the assumption that species like us will always remain beneath them. They have never been challenged because no one has ever had the patience to challenge them. She stood and walked to the small window that looked out over the station's exterior. Ships moved in the distance, great vessels belonging to the Council's major powers. Human ships were not permitted in this sector without special authorization. Patience is not weakness, Elena said. Patience is what happens when you understand that some things cannot be rushed. We have been watching for 200 years. We have been learning. We have been building. And we have been waiting for the right moment. When will that moment come? Elena turned back to him. It will come when they give us a reason. They always do, eventually. Powers like the Vorthani cannot help themselves. They see weakness and they exploit it. They see opportunity and they take it. Someday, they will do something that demands a response. And on that day, we will be ready. She returned to her desk and opened one of her notebooks. In the meantime, we continue to watch. We continue to learn. We continue to build. And we continue to be overlooked. Marcus nodded slowly. What do you need me to do? The same thing I need everyone to do. Be patient. Be observant. Be better than they expect. She smiled, but there was something hard beneath the smile. Something that had been forged over 3 decades of sitting in the worst seat in the chamber, watching her people be dismissed again and again. And when the time comes, be ready to show them what humanity has become while they weren't looking. She returned to her notebook, recording the day's observations in her careful handwriting. 47 petitions denied. 47 sessions of being ignored. 47 opportunities to watch and learn without being watched in return. In the corridors outside, council members walked past Earth's embassy without a second glance. They had more important things to think about than the small, short-lived species that occupied the galaxy's most irrelevant seat. They did not know that they were being studied. They did not know that every dismissal, every slight, every casual cruelty was being recorded and remembered. They did not know that humanity had been building something in the darkness between stars for 200 years. They would learn. Eventually, they would all learn. But not today. Today, Elena Vasquez closed her notebook, filed it with the others, and began preparing her petition for the next session. Patience, after all, was humanity's greatest weapon. And humanity had learned to be very, very patient. 5 years passed like water through open fingers. The galaxy continued to turn. The great powers continued to dominate. And humanity continued to be forgotten. On the trading world of Nexus 7, a Tavathi merchant named Bellin noticed something strange in his accounting records. His shipping company had operated the same routes for 3 generations, carrying goods between the Crystalline Accord's manufacturing centers and the outer colonies. The profit margins had always been predictable, steady, and modest. Now they were shrinking. Bellin spent 3 days reviewing his data. He discovered that several smaller routes, ones he had always considered too insignificant to bother with, had become surprisingly profitable. Ships belonging to species he barely recognized were carrying goods to markets that had never mattered before. The cargo was nothing special: basic supplies, medical equipment, educational materials, but the volume was enormous. He traced the shipments back to their source. Many of them originated from human corporations. Bellin mentioned this to his colleagues at the Merchant Guild. They shrugged. Human businesses had always existed on the margins of galactic commerce, handling the scraps that major powers did not want. If they were making money on insignificant routes, it was hardly worth discussing. Bellin filed a report anyway. He was not sure why. Something about the pattern bothered him, like a sound at the edge of hearing that would not quite go away. The report sat in a database somewhere, unread and forgotten. On the Vorthani homeworld of Keth Prime, a young military analyst named Kethra was assigned the most boring task imaginable: updating the threat assessment files for minor species. It was work given to junior officers with no connections and no prospects. It was meant to teach humility. Kethra approached the task with more dedication than it deserved. She was stubborn by nature, determined to prove herself despite her low rank. She worked through the files one by one, cross-referencing data, checking sources, looking for gaps. When she reached the file on humanity, she found almost nothing. The file contained basic information: population statistics, territory maps, economic output figures. All of it was at least 50 years old. The military section was nearly empty. A few notes mentioned that humans operated patrol vessels in their home system and maintained a small defense force on their 3 colony worlds. The conclusion stated that humanity posed no threat to Vorthani interests. Kethra requested updated intelligence. She wanted to know the current size of the human fleet, the capabilities of their weapon systems, the training standards of their military personnel. Her request came back marked low priority, resources not allocated. She pushed harder, going through proper channels, filing formal requests, citing regulations that required threat assessments to be updated every 20 years. Humanity's file had not been updated in 70. Her superior, a decorated commander named Rathsal, summoned her to his office. "You are wasting time," he told her. "Humanity has 3 colony worlds and a handful of patrol ships. What threat assessment do you need? Write that they pose no danger and move on." "Sir, regulations require common sense. The humans are insignificant. They've always been insignificant. They will always be insignificant. Your time would be better spent on species that actually matter." Kethra left the office with her request denied. She considered dropping the matter. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. Instead, she began her own investigation. She used her personal time, her personal resources, her personal network of contacts from the military academy. She asked questions quietly, gathered data carefully, and slowly assembled a picture that troubled her more with each passing week. Human ships had been spotted in places they should not be. Not many, just one here, one there, always alone, always on legitimate business. But the pattern was strange. The ships appeared at the edges of unexplored regions, near dead stars and empty systems that held nothing of value. They stayed for days or weeks, then departed. What were they doing out there? Kethra could not find an answer, but she kept looking. On Earth, in a garden outside Geneva, Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat in a wheelchair and watched the sun set over the mountains. She was old now, her hair white, her hands trembling with age. She had served the council for 37 years. Soon, she would retire. Marcus Chun sat beside her. He was no longer young either. Gray touched his temples, and lines had formed around his eyes. But his patience remained intact, strengthened by decades of practice. "The transition is scheduled for next month," he said. "I'll present my credentials to the council as the new ambassador." Elena nodded slowly. "They will ignore you, just as they ignored me. Do not let it frustrate you." "I won't." "Good." She turned to look at him. Her eyes were still sharp, still clear, still watching. "The reports from the outer facilities are encouraging. The network is nearly complete. Another 50 years, perhaps less, and we will be ready." "I may not live to see it," Marcus said. "Neither will I. That was never the point." Elena reached out and took his hand. Her grip was weak but steady. "We are not building for ourselves. We are building for those who come after. Every generation adds to the foundation. Every generation expands what we can do. Every generation passes on the work to the next." "And the council?" "The council continues to ignore us, as we hoped they would." Elena smiled. "Let me tell you something about power, Marcus. True power is not what you show to the world. True power is what you keep hidden. The Vorthani display their fleets and their weapons because they want others to fear them. We display nothing because we want others to forget us. And when the time comes, they will remember. They will remember everything." She squeezed his hand gently. "But that is for you to manage now. My part is finished." 1 month later, Elena Vasquez retired from the diplomatic service. A small ceremony was held at the embassy on Nexus Prime. 3 representatives from minor species attended. The major powers sent no one. Marcus Chun assumed the position of ambassador. He presented his credentials to the council during a routine session. High Councilor Vrathkar acknowledged him with a wave of his clawed hand, barely glancing in his direction. The petition for elevation to minor member status was tabled for the 48th time. In her apartment on Earth, watching the ceremony through a secure feed, Elena smiled. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. 3 years later, Elena died peacefully in her sleep. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people from dozens of minor species, overlooked species that the Council's great powers had dismissed as irrelevant. They came from across the galaxy to pay their respects to a woman most of them had never met. They knew her by her work. For decades, Elena Vasquez had quietly reached out to the forgotten peoples of the galaxy. She had offered them friendship, partnership, and something even more valuable, hope. She had told them that they did not have to accept their place at the bottom of the hierarchy forever. She had told them that change was possible if they were willing to be patient. Many of them had listened. Many of them had waited. Many of them were still waiting, trusting in a promise they did not fully understand. On Keth Prime, Kethra finally received a response to her investigation. It came not from official channels, but from a contact in military intelligence who owed her a favor. The data was incomplete, gathered from scattered sources, but it was enough. Humans had been building in the spaces between stars. Not colonies, something else. Structures hidden in the void where no one looked. Ships constructed from materials that did not match any known human technology. Communication networks using frequencies that Vorthani sensors could not detect. The scope was impossible to determine. The purpose was impossible to guess. But the implication was clear. Humanity was not what they appeared to be. Kethra prepared a formal report and submitted it to her superiors. She outlined her findings, presented her evidence, and recommended an immediate full-scale intelligence operation to determine the extent of human capabilities. The report was rejected. "You have wasted enough resources on this fantasy," Vrathsal told her. "The humans are a minor species with no significant military capacity. This obsession of yours suggests instability. I am reassigning you to administrative duties until you demonstrate better judgment." Kethra accepted the reassignment without protest. She had learned what she needed to learn. The Vorthani leadership would not listen. They could not imagine a galaxy where a species like humanity posed a threat. That failure of imagination, Kethra knew, would cost them everything eventually. She did not know when. She did not know how. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that a storm was coming. And when it arrived, the Vorthani would face it completely unprepared. In his office on Nexus Prime, Ambassador Marcus Chen read Kethra's rejected report. His intelligence network had acquired it within hours of its submission. He noted the analyst's name, her background, her conclusions. She was perceptive. She was persistent. She was dangerous. She was also completely correct. Marcus filed the report with the others and returned to his work. The timeline remained unchanged. The preparations continued, and humanity remained overlooked, building in the darkness, waiting for the moment that would change everything. That moment was coming, sooner than anyone expected. Kepler's hope was humanity's youngest colony, a green and blue world orbiting a yellow star in a system the Council had deemed worthless. The planet had been settled 80 years ago by families seeking a fresh start, scientists pursuing research and peace, and dreamers who wanted to build something new. 2 million people called it home. The planet had rolling hills covered in purple grass, forests of trees with silver leaves, and oceans that glowed faintly at night with bioluminescent life. The colonists had built their cities carefully, preserving the natural beauty, integrating their structures into the landscape rather than dominating it. Children played in parks beside alien flowers. Researchers studied the native ecosystem. Farmers grew crops that combined earth seeds with local nutrients. It was a simple life, a peaceful life, a life built on hope. The Vorthani battle group arrived without warning on a Tuesday morning. 15 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and established orbit around Kepler's Hope. They did not announce themselves. They did not issue demands. They simply appeared, their weapons charged, their shields raised, their intentions clear. Commander Vrathkor himself led the fleet. He had risen to High Counselor 3 years ago, and his ambition had grown with his power. Kepler's Hope occupied a strategic position along a corridor that would soon become valuable as the Vorthani expanded their territory. The humans would have to move. He gave them 6 hours. The message was broadcast across all frequencies. Human colonists will evacuate this world immediately. All personnel will depart within 6 hours. Any human remaining after this deadline will be considered hostile and eliminated. This territory is now claimed by the Vorthani hegemony. 6 hours. For 2 million people. It was impossible, and Vrathkor knew it. He was not interested in evacuation. He was interested in sending a message. Governor Sarah Mitchell contacted the council immediately. She begged for intervention, for mediation, for anything that might stop what was coming. The council's response was slow, bureaucratic, and useless. Emergency sessions were scheduled. Debates were proposed. Committees were formed. None of it would happen in time. The colonists did what they could. They loaded children onto ships. They crammed families into cargo vessels. They launched everything that could fly, sending it toward the edge of the system where human patrol ships waited helplessly, their weapons no match for Vorthani warships. 400,000 people escaped. The elderly gave up their seats for the young. Parents sent their children ahead while they stayed behind. Teachers loaded students onto shuttles and then returned to help others. When the deadline passed, 1.6 million humans remained on Kepler's Hope. They had gathered in the cities, in the parks, in the places they loved. They held each other and waited. Vrathkor gave the order. The bombardment lasted 3 hours. Vorthani weapons turned cities into craters, forests into ash, oceans into steam. The planet's surface became a hellscape of fire and destruction. When it was over, nothing remained. No buildings, no trees, no life. Kepler's Hope was dead. The news reached Earth within hours. It spread across human space like a shockwave, leaving grief and rage in its wake. On every human world, people stopped what they were doing and wept. They wept for the dead, for the children who would never grow up, for the dreams that had been burned to nothing. Ambassador Marcus Chen received the news in his office on Nexus Prime. His aide delivered it personally, her voice shaking as she read the casualty figures. Marcus said nothing for a long time. He sat behind his desk, Elena's desk, and stared at the wall. His hands were steady. His face was calm. But something had changed in his eyes, something hard and cold and patient. "Schedule an emergency council session," he said finally. "I will address the full assembly." The council convened that evening. For once, humanity's seat was not in the back row. Representatives cleared space near the central dais, curious to see how the humans would react. Would there be tears? Accusations? Desperate pleas for help? Marcus Chen walked to the speaker's platform with measured steps. He wore a simple black suit, the color of mourning. His face showed nothing, no grief, no anger, no fear. He stood before the assembled representatives of 100 species and waited for silence. Today, he began. The Vorthani hegemony destroyed the human colony of Kepler's Hope. They gave our people 6 hours to evacuate. 2 million souls. When this proved impossible, they bombarded the planet until nothing remained. He paused, letting the words settle. This was not war. There was no conflict between our peoples. There was no provocation, no threat, no dispute. The Vorthani wanted our world, so they took it. They wanted our people gone, so they killed them. They wanted to send a message to the galaxy about what happens to minor species who occupy space that major powers desire. The chamber was silent. Representatives shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at Vrathker, who sat in his elevated seat with his scales gleaming, showing no regret. "The Galactic Council has witnessed these events," Marcus continued. "Every species here has seen what was done. We now formally request the Council's judgment on this matter. We ask that the unprovoked destruction of Kepler's hope be condemned. We ask that those responsible be held accountable." He stopped speaking and waited. The silence stretched on. Representatives exchanged glances. Some whispered to their aides. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Finally, Vrathker rose. "The Council recognizes the High Counselor of the Vorthani hegemony. This matter is not as simple as the human suggests," Vrathker said. His voice was calm, almost bored. "The territory in question has long been of strategic interest to the hegemony. Human colonization of Kepler's hope represented an incursion into our sphere of influence. We acted to protect our legitimate interests. You murdered 1.6 million civilians," Marcus said. "We removed an obstacle to regional stability. The loss of life was regrettable but necessary." Vrathker's scales rippled slightly, the Vorthani equivalent of a shrug. "I move that this matter be classified as a territorial dispute and referred to the appropriate committees for further study." "Seconded," said the representative of the Crystalline Accord. The vote was held. Species allied with the Vorthani voted in favor. Species afraid of the Vorthani abstained. Species sympathetic to humanity found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered. The motion passed. The destruction of Kepler's hope was officially a territorial dispute. No sanctions, no condemnation, no justice. Marcus Chun stood motionless through the vote. When it concluded, he nodded once, slowly. "Humanity acknowledges the Council's decision," he said. His voice remained perfectly calm, perfectly controlled. "We understand that the Council will not act on this matter. We will therefore pursue appropriate remedies independently." He turned and walked toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the silent chamber. Every representative watched him go, uncertain what his words meant, unsettled by his composure. At the door, he paused and looked back. "The Vorthani have shown the galaxy what they are. In time, humanity will show the galaxy what we are. I suggest you pay attention. You may find the comparison instructive." He walked out. In the chamber, Vrathker laughed. "Appropriate remedies," he repeated mockingly. "What will they do? Send their patrol ships? Write angry letters?" He looked around at the other representatives. "Let this serve as a reminder to all Meyer species. This is what happens when you forget your place." On the other side of the station, in the cramped offices of Earth's embassy, Marcus Chun activated a communication device. His hands were still steady. His face was still calm. But his eyes burned with something that had been building for 200 years. "Protocol patience is complete," he said into the device. "Initiate protocol remembrance." Across the galaxy, in hidden facilities and secret stations, humans received the message. They had prepared for this moment for generations. They had hoped it would never come, but they had always known that someday, the galaxy's great powers would do something that could not be ignored. That day had arrived. In her reassigned office on Keth Prime, Analyst Kethra watched the council session recording with growing horror. Not at the atrocity, she had expected something like this eventually. The Vorthani had committed such acts before, against other species in other systems. Her horror was at her own people's blindness. "You fools," she whispered at the screen. "You absolute fools. You have no idea what you have done." She pulled up her old files, the ones she had assembled years ago, the ones no one would read. She looked at the patterns she had found, the structures in empty space, the ships in unexpected places, the network that humanity had been building in secret. She finally understood what it was for, They were waiting, she realized. All this time, they were waiting for us to give them a reason. She tried one more time to warn her superiors. She filed emergency reports. She requested urgent meetings. She begged anyone who would listen to pay attention to what was coming. No one listened. No one ever listened. 3 weeks later, the galaxy would learn what humanity had been building in the darkness. 3 weeks later, the Vorthani would discover that being feared and being powerful were not the same thing. 3 weeks later, everything would change. Admiral Kethfer woke to alarms. The Vorthani Military Command Center on Keth Prime was chaos. Officers ran between stations, shouting reports that made no sense. Screens flickered with data that could not be real. Communications channels overflowed with panicked transmissions from across the hegemony. Report. Kethfer bellowed as he entered the command room. His aide, a young officer with scales pale from fear, struggled to find words. Sir, our weapon systems. All of them. They've stopped functioning. What do you mean, stop functioning? Every ship in the fleet. Every defense platform. Every military installation across all 12 homeworlds. The weapons simply turned off. We cannot reactivate them. We cannot even diagnose the problem. It's as if they were never designed to work at all. Kethfer stared at him. That's impossible. Yes, sir. It is. On the command center's main screen, a map of Vorthani space flickered and changed. New contacts appeared, thousands of them, emerging from empty space like ghosts becoming solid. Ships. Human ships. But not the small patrol vessels the Council records described. These were warships, sleek and deadly, built with technologies that Vorthani scientists could not identify. They had come from nowhere. From the spaces between stars where nothing could survive. From dimensions that the Council's greatest minds had only theorized about. They had been hiding in plain sight for centuries, and now they were everywhere. The communication system activated. A human voice spoke across every Vorthani channel, calm and clear and absolutely certain. This is Ambassador Marcus Chun of Earth. Your weapons are disabled. Your defense systems are offline. Your fleet is defenseless. Every military asset you possess is now under our control. Kethfer grabbed the nearest console. How? How is this possible? The voice continued as if hearing him. You are wondering how this happened. The answer is simple. 200 years ago, when humanity first joined the Council, we recognized what we were dealing with. A galaxy dominated by powers who respected only strength. A system designed to keep species like us at the bottom forever. We could have fought then and lost. Instead, we chose to wait. On the screen, the human ships moved into position around Vorthani worlds. They did not fire. They did not need to. We spent 2 centuries watching you, learning your technologies, understanding your weaknesses, building in places you never thought to look. You dismissed us as irrelevant, and that dismissal was the greatest gift you could have given us. You never bothered to watch what we were doing because you never believed we could threaten you. In the command center, officers stood frozen. Some wept. Some prayed. Some simply stared at the screens, unable to process what they were seeing. 3 weeks ago, you destroyed Kepler's hope. You murdered 1.6 million of our people civilians, children, families who had done nothing except build a home on a world you decided you wanted. The Council called it a territorial dispute. We call it genocide. Chun's voice hardened. We could do to your 12 homeworlds what you did to Kepler's hope, right now. Your defenses are gone. Your fleets are helpless. There is no force in this galaxy that could stop us. The species you treated as insignificant could end you in a single day. Kethfer closed his eyes. This was the end. Not just for him, not just for the military, but for the entire Vorthani civilization. They had brought this upon themselves, and now they would pay the price. Then Chun said something unexpected. "But we will not." The command center went silent. Even the alarms seemed to pause. Humanity did not spend 200 years preparing for revenge. We prepared for justice. There is a difference. Revenge is easy. Justice requires discipline, restraint, and the wisdom to know when enough is enough. The Vorthani taught us what happens when power is wielded without conscience. We will not repeat your mistake. We want one thing. The commanders who ordered the attack on Kepler's Hope, High Council of Hrathkor, and his subordinates will stand trial. Not before a human court. Before a galactic court with judges drawn from every species the Vorthani have wronged over the millennia. Every act of aggression, every genocide, every theft of territory will be heard. Justice will be witnessed by all. The transmission ended. Kethfer opened his eyes. Around him, his officers slowly began to move again, speaking in hushed voices, trying to understand what had just happened. They had been prepared for death. They had not been prepared for mercy. A different kind of transmission reached them, then reports from across the galaxy. Human representatives had appeared simultaneously on dozens of worlds. Not Vorthani worlds. The worlds of minor species, the overlooked species, the ones the great powers had exploited and ignored for millennia. The humans came offering alliance, protection, technology, partnership. They came with gifts that had been prepared for generations, medical advances, agricultural innovations, energy systems that could transform struggling colonies into thriving civilizations. They came with knowledge shared freely, without conditions, without demands. And they came with a simple message. You do not have to accept your place at the bottom of the hierarchy. Not anymore. On Keth Prime, analyst Kethra watched the reports flood in and understood at last what humanity had truly been building. Not just weapons, not just ships, not just defenses. They had been building a coalition. Every species the Vorthani had bullied, every civilization the Crystal and the Cord had exploited, every people the Council had dismissed as irrelevant humanity, had reached out to them, quietly, patiently, over decades and centuries. They had made promises and kept them. They had offered help without asking for anything in return. They had planted seeds of friendship in soil that the great powers had salted with contempt. Now those seeds were blooming. The Torvathi announced their alliance with humanity within hours. The Selvathi followed. Then the Kreen, the Molluth, the Varn species that had sat in silence at council meetings for generations. Species that had been stepped on and overlooked. Species that had remembered every slight and every cruelty. They remembered who had helped them. They remembered who had hurt them. The galaxy was realigning itself in real time, and there was nothing the old powers could do to stop it. In his office on Nexus Prime, High Council of Hrathkor received the news of his own arrest warrant. A coalition of 30 species had submitted it to the Council, demanding his immediate surrender. The Vorthani delegation tried to object, but their protests were drowned out by the voices of peoples they had spent millennia ignoring. His scales, once gleaming with pride, turned gray with stress. How? He kept asking. How did this happen? They were nothing. They were no one. His aide, reviewing the intelligence reports that Kethra had submitted years ago, shook his head. They were never nothing. We just refused to see it. Hrathkor was still protesting when Council security forces arrived to take him into custody. He would face trial not as a High Counselor, not as a conqueror, but as a war criminal. His victims would finally have their day. Throughout the galaxy, the transformation accelerated. The Crystal and the Cord, recognizing that their economic dominance was ending, began negotiating partnerships with human corporations. Species that had spent centuries at the margins of galactic society found themselves suddenly important. their voices heard, their needs considered. The council itself was changing. The old seating arrangements were abandoned. Minor species moved to the central dais. Major powers found themselves surrounded by former subjects who no longer feared them. Ambassador Chun addressed the restructured council 1 week after the revelation. He stood not in the back row but at the speaker's platform, surrounded by allies. Humanity did not seek this power, he said. We would have been content to remain overlooked, to live our lives in peace, to build our colonies without interference. But the galaxy's great powers would not allow that. They saw our weakness and exploited it. They saw our hope and crushed it. They forced us to become something we never wanted to be. He paused, looking around at the assembled representatives, old enemies and new friends alike. Now we have a choice. We could use our power to dominate, as others have done before us. We could become the tyrants who rule through fear. We have that capability, but we reject that path. Power without wisdom is just another form of barbarism. Strength without compassion is just another form of weakness. Instead, we offer something different: partnership, alliance, a galaxy where strength is used to protect the vulnerable, where justice applies equally to all species, where being overlooked is no longer a death sentence. This is what we built for. This is what we waited for. This is what our ancestors dreamed of when they sat in the worst seat in this chamber and watched the great powers dismiss them. He looked toward the back row, where humanity's old seat remained empty. We will never forget where we came from. We will never forget what it meant to be overlooked. And we will spend the rest of our existence making sure that no species ever has to feel that way again. The applause started slowly, from the minor species who understood best what Chun's words meant. It spread through the chamber, growing louder, until even some of the former great powers joined in, not from enthusiasm, but from the recognition that a new era had begun. The galaxy would never be the same. And somewhere, in a garden on Earth, the grave of Elena Vasquez was covered in flowers from. And somewhere, in a garden on Earth, the grave of Elena Vasquez was covered in flowers from 100 different worlds, left by representatives of SPE 1 year, had passed since the revelation. The galaxy had changed in ways that would have seemed impossible to anyone who had lived under the old order. The trial of Rathkar and his commanders had concluded 3 months ago. It had lasted 6 months, with testimony from thousands of witnesses representing dozens of species. The crimes presented went far beyond Kepler's hope. Centuries of Orthani aggression were documented, catalogued, and exposed to the light of galactic scrutiny. The defendants had expected execution. Many thought they deserved it. The families of the dead certainly did. Instead, the tribunal composed of judges from species the Vorthani had wronged delivered a different sentence. The war criminals would spend the remainder of their lives helping to rebuild what they had destroyed. They would work alongside the descendants of their victims. They would see, every day, the consequences of their actions. They would live with their guilt until natural death claimed them. Some called this mercy. Others called it a more profound punishment than any execution could be. On the reconstructed council, new alliances had formed. The Tolvathi, once minor traders, now led the reformed Commerce Guild alongside human economists. The Selvathi managed a new peacekeeping force, their discipline and honor finally recognized after millennia of being dismissed. The Kreen, whose mathematical abilities had been exploited for generations, now directed the Council's scientific initiatives. Species that had spent centuries fighting for scraps now sat at tables where decisions were made. Their voices mattered. Their votes counted. Their dignity was respected. The old powers had not disappeared. The Vornthani hegemony still existed, though its military had been drastically reduced and its government reformed. A new generation of leaders, including many who had opposed the old regime, worked to transform their society. Among them was Kethra, the analyst who had seen the truth when no one else would listen. She had become an ambassador, representing a faction of Orthani reformists who wanted to build a different future. It was difficult work. Many of her own people resented the changes. Many victims of Orthani aggression still hated all Orthani without distinction. Progress came slowly, measured in small victories and painful compromises. But it came. The Crystal and the Cord had adapted as well, redirecting their commercial empire toward partnerships rather than exploitation. They had recognized, with the cold logic of their silicon minds, that the old ways were no longer sustainable. Better to evolve than to be left behind. In the council chambers on Nexus Prime, the transformation was visible everywhere. The walls still gleamed with polished obsidian, but the seating had been completely reorganized. No more back rows. No more relegated sections. Representatives sat in clusters based on regional cooperation, not historical hierarchies. Ambassador Marcus Chun addressed the assembly. His hair had gone fully gray in the past year. The weight of responsibility showed in the lines of his face. But his eyes still held the same patient light that Elena Vasquez had cultivated in him decades ago. 1 year ago, humanity revealed what we had been building in secret. Many of you wondered why. Why did we hide? Why did we wait? Why did we endure centuries of dismissal when we had the power to demand respect? He paused, looking around the chamber at faces from 100 species, some familiar, some still learning to work together, all of them listening. The answer is simple. We learned something important by being overlooked. We learned what the galaxy looks like from the bottom. We learned how it feels to be dismissed, to be ignored, to have your concerns waved away by powers who cannot be bothered to see you. We learned the pain of being invisible. That education was valuable. It taught us empathy. It taught us patience. It taught us that strength means nothing if it is not paired with wisdom and compassion. Chun walked to the center of the dais, where a new symbol had been installed, a circle of stars, each one representing a founding member of the Reformed Council. When we built our hidden fleet, our secret facilities, our network of alliances, we did not build them for conquest. We built them for this moment. Not to rule the galaxy, but to transform it. Not to replace one tyranny with another, but to create something genuinely new. Some of you expected us to seize control, to become the new dominant power, to sit in the highest seats and dictate terms to everyone else. He smiled slightly. We refuse those seats. We always will, because the moment we accept supremacy, we become what we fought against. We become the powers that overlooked us. In the gallery, a young human diplomat named Sarah Vasquez, great-grandniece of Elena, listened to Chun's words. She had inherited her ancestors' patience, her quiet observation, her understanding that some things could not be rushed. She had also inherited something else. Elena's old seat, the one in the back row, the worst position in the chamber. She sat there by choice, not by assignment. It was empty most of the time now. Representatives could sit wherever they wished. But Sarah returned to it often. It helped her remember. It helped her stay humble. Chun continued his address. Our true project was never military. It was social. For 200 years, while we built ships and weapons, we also built friendships. We reached out to every species that had been overlooked, every civilization that had been dismissed, every people that the great powers had stepped on. We listened to them. We helped them. We showed them that someone saw their worth, even if the council did not. Those friendships became alliances. Those alliances became the foundation of this new council. We did not transform the galaxy alone. We transformed it with partners who trusted us, because we had earned that trust through generations of patient work, He looked toward the section where the minor species, the formerly minor species now, sat in positions of prominence. The galaxy feared our weapons. That fear was useful. It forced the old powers to listen when they would have preferred to ignore us. But weapons were never our greatest strength. Our greatest strength was this: we remembered what it meant to be forgotten, and we used that memory to build something better. The applause that followed was different from the applause a year ago. Then, it had been shocked, uncertain, mixed with fear. Now, it was genuine appreciation, recognition of what had been accomplished and what still remained to be done. After the session, Sarah found herself walking through the corridors of the council station. She passed representatives from dozens of species, all engaged in the ordinary business of governance. Arguments about trade agreements, debates over environmental regulations, negotiations over border disputes, normal problems, healthy problems, the problems of a galaxy learning to work together instead of dominating each other. She paused at a window overlooking the station's exterior. Ships from hundreds of worlds moved through the space beyond, their designs reflecting the diversity of their origins. Human vessels flew alongside Torvati traders, Selvathi peacekeepers, and even reformed Vorthani diplomatic craft. A voice spoke behind her. "Ambassador Vasquez?" She turned. A young Vorthani stood there, his scales a deep blue that marked him as barely into adulthood. He wore the uniform of the reformed diplomatic corps. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "My name is Kethrol. My mother is Ambassador Kethra." Sarah nodded. She knew the name. Everyone knew the analyst who had tried to warn her people, who had seen the truth when her leaders were blind. "Your ancestor," Kethrol continued. "She reached out to my mother years ago, before the revelation. She offered friendship when our species were supposed to be enemies. My mother never forgot that kindness." "Ambassador Elena believed that people were more than their governments," Sarah said. "She believed that individuals could choose to be better, even when their nations could not. She was right." Kethrol looked out the window at the ships moving past. "My generation is different from my grandparents. We do not want to rule through fear. We want to be part of something better. Your ancestor gave us permission to imagine that was possible." Sarah smiled. "The work isn't finished. It won't be finished in our lifetimes. I know, but we're building something worth building. That matters." He nodded respectfully and walked away, back to the duties that called him. Sarah watched him go, seeing in his young shoulders the weight of a species trying to redeem itself. She returned to the gallery and took her seat in the back row. The next session was beginning, a routine debate about agricultural subsidies for developing worlds. Nothing dramatic, nothing historic, just the ordinary work of a galaxy learning to be better than it had been. Sarah opened her notebook paper like her great-great-aunt had used and began to write. She recorded the day's events, the small victories and ongoing challenges, the conversations that mattered, and the progress that still needed to be made. The work would continue, generation after generation, patient and persistent, building on the foundation that others had laid. Humanity had learned to wait. They had learned to watch. They had learned that true power was not about domination, but about transformation. And in the back row of the Galactic Council, a young woman with her ancestors' eyes continued to observe, to learn, and to remember. Some traditions, she knew, were worth keeping. There,